Welcome to the show. Last week we started a new series. We were talking about college, and in particular, ways that we can reduce this large expense, the largest expense for our children, and next to a home, the largest expense that most people have in their lifetime. So we've been talking about the financial aid process, the ways that we can reduce your out-of-pocket cost for assistance and what's out there. The biggest point that I wanted to make, at least at the onset, I made last week, and that is the people who receive the most aid and pay the least amount for college are not the ones in the greatest need. The people who receive the most aid and pay the least amount of money for college are not the ones with the greatest needs. They are the ones that understand the process. And so what we're going to focus on, continue on today, is the understanding of the process and just helping you understand the different rules, what goes into determining whether or not a student qualifies for financial aid, and so forth. Last week we left off talking about the financial aid equation. And so I want to go back and revisit that a little bit and continue with that discussion. But we talked about that a child's financial need is determined by the difference between the cost of the college and something that we call the expected family contribution, the EFC. So we determine need for a student by looking at the cost of the college minus the expected family contribution. And the expected family contribution was the number that the government determines that we should be able to contribute to college based on our income and our assets. And we know this number by going to the website for FAFSA, F-A-F-S-A, the free application for federal student aid. And this is the starting point for all parents. FAFSA is actually a website that's maintained by the Department of Education. You go to it, you provide your child's income, assets. The outcome is this expected family contribution. And I also mentioned as a side note last week that this process needs to start for parents October the 1st. That's when you can do this. This is a little bit of a change in the past. We used to wait till the end of the year to do these things for people to have their end of the year income and so forth. Now they've fast forwarded the process in which you could start. So all parents need to look at this starting next month, actually. But the expected family contribution, talking about that, is pretty much where we left off. I talked about an example last week between Auburn and MIT. And I was talking about if your child was looking to go into engineering, was considering the two different colleges. You as a parent trying to figure out what you can do, what you cannot do, what you can afford, what you cannot afford. One of the points that I made is those two different universities were picked for a reason, because they have a very different treatment for financial aid. Some colleges out there you will find are very aggressive when it comes to financial aid. Other colleges you will find are not so aggressive. In this situation, I mentioned that MIT provides 100% of a child's financial need. So the difference between the cost of the college and this government number, this expected family contribution, MIT traditionally provides 100% of that for financial aid. Auburn, not so much. They're only known to provide about half of that. So you have additional costs associated with that. And when we worked through the example, I pointed out that the actual cost of MIT was actually less than Auburn. Even though the tuition cost was actually double, the cost to the parent was actually half. It was 50% less. Now, how in the world is that possible? How can a school that costs twice as much in tuition actually cost you less? And that's really where we left off last week. And I started talking about part of it is because of the resources available with the colleges. Some colleges have a lot more resources than others. You typically find these smaller, private, more expensive schools have very strong endowments. They have a lot of alumni giving. They're very active in that area. They have a lot of people that are making contributions to the university that can be used to provide assistance for the students. Some universities have research arms, maybe hospitals associated with them. These provide a lot of resources for the college to use for the student. But the biggest reason for this is a supply and demand. And I started talking last week about that the majority of students go to generally the large public universities in the state. Here in Birmingham, probably 80% or more of seniors go to Alabama or Auburn. And that's just pretty much the way it is. It was like that when I was in school. It was probably more than that when I was in school. I mean, nowadays, shopping for colleges has been a little bit more, parents are a lot more involved than they were when I was in school. We pretty much just picked the school and we went. We didn't go out and visit schools like they do now. So students have spread out a little bit more on the country, looking at a lot of different schools, but you still have that same type of situation. A large majority of students go to a handful of larger public universities that are very visible, primarily because they have a football team or something along those lines. And so the supply and demand factor comes in because these universities do not have to work very hard to attract the students. They have more students than they know what to do with. A lot of these smaller universities that are more expensive, private universities and so forth, they have to work a lot harder to attract the student. And that's really where it comes in. So when you contrast a university like Auburn and MIT, MIT is a lot more aggressive in providing financial packages for the students because they have to be. Auburn does not have to do that. They don't have to work as hard, but for these universities that are more, especially the ones that are more expensive, the private out-of-state universities, they need to provide more aid. They also have more resources to provide that aid, but they really need to work hard to attract these students. Now, colleges are a business, just like anything else. So the way I think of this financial aid is like or marketing dollars. You know, do you have to spend dollars to attract customers? Well, if you don't need any customers, then you're not going to spend any money to attract more customers. And it really is that simple. And when you look at the different colleges, that you're going to notice that not all colleges are created equal when it comes to providing aid. And because of that, you can't necessarily limit the school choice for a parent based on the standard tuition rates, because you may find these more expensive schools because of the resources they have or because they need to be more aggressive to attract the students. The actual cost to the parent might be less. So one of the principles that I mentioned last week is that limiting school choice does not necessarily reduce a parent's share of college cost. Now, what's logical for most parents would be to look at a situation like Auburn and MIT, think about the budget, think about what's going on there, and they might conclude that they need to steer their children to Auburn. While they might recognize that MIT is a great engineering, in fact, it's probably the most prestigious engineering school in the world, Auburn's a good school. And they just don't see the benefit of the additional tuition dollars. But the reason why I use that example is because I wanted parents to realize that isn't just because the tuition is more for MIT does not mean that it's actually going to cost the parents more because of financial aid. So the financial aid reduces the cost. Now, I'm not saying that I want you to send your children to the most expensive schools so they receive the most aid. That's not what I'm saying at all. You know, would it be the right decision for your child to study engineering at Auburn? Would it be the right decision for them to go to MIT? I have no clue. You know, could they even get into MIT? Could they handle the academic situations there? I have no idea. That's not the point. I just don't want parents to rule out the possibility of a university because they are just not aware of the actual cost of that university. And you actually cannot know the cost to your child and to a parent until you go through this financial aid process. That is necessary for you to understand what these colleges are going to actually cost. Now, in the introduction last week, I started out by saying that I wanted to talk about how we choose colleges. And this is kind of what I'm leading up to with this understanding of the financial aid. Now, how do most of the time our children choose a college? I mean, how do they decide? Well, in my experience, it's generally several different things. It's where their friends go. It's who they root for. It's who they tailgate at. It's who won the Iron Bowl. It might be what's close to home. Might be what's far away from home. It's not generally selected because of the academics and the cost involved. Most children choose a college either because their friends are going or their parents went there or something along those lines. And I think that's fine, but I just want to encourage you to go about this a little bit different. What most people do is they have a handful of colleges that their child is interested in. They might go visit those colleges and then kind of go from there. And then once they decide where they want to go, then they start the financial aid process. They start the admissions process. And so I'm actually kind of suggesting the reverse of that. And the reverse of that would be to allow this financial aid and cost to drive the selection of the schools. So you can start out with a handful of schools, but you also need to start out with the financial aid process and then eliminate schools based on what financial packages are provided. Not necessarily choosing the schools, going to visit them, and then starting the financial aid process. That's how most parents and students choose their schools. They pick a handful of schools, they go visit, they decide which ones they like, and then they kind of go from there. So what I'm suggesting to you is the best way to do this is to start out with a handful of schools, go through the financial process, the financial aid process, see what assistance is out there, see what the actual cost is going to be, and then eliminate the colleges that you're not interested in. Go visit them then. Now, one of the principles that I mentioned a few minutes ago is that not all colleges are created equal. And this is going to come out when you choose a college the way that I'm talking about. Because if you only choose a handful of colleges and then go visit and then go through the financial aid process, you're just going to find the financial aid is not going to be able to be shopped. And so what I'm wanting to do is create a competitive situation between these different colleges so that the actual cost is what drives the boat. And the analogy that I would use for that would be buying a car. You know, what's one way that you can overpay for a car? You can go into a car dealership letting the salesman know that you have bought the car. Now, if you want to pay the most for that, that's fine. But if you want to pay a reduced amount for that, and you need to create a competitive situation for that car dealer, you need to go into it not letting them know that you've already pre-chosen the university, that you could walk away very easily, and they need to give you the deal that you need. So let's just take a break there, and we'll come back after the pause, and we'll continue from there. Welcome back. We've been talking about a little bit different way to choose a college. And, you know, the principles that I was trying to get across to you is that this idea that you need to limit school choice based on the tuition cost is a little misleading. But that's the way most parents look at this situation. The actual cost of college to the parent isn't necessarily driven by that. It's driven by the financial aid process, the difference between the two. So you will find, because all colleges are not created equal, that you will have a very different situation between universities. You will find some universities that provide very little assistance. You'll find other universities that will provide a lot of assistance. So the cost is going to be the net of the two. So you may find that a more expensive school is costing less than a less expensive school. So the point I was trying to make is that in the selection of this, in the college selection process that you go through with your children, limiting school choice does not necessarily reduce a parent's share of college cost. Should you send your children to the more expensive schools? I have no idea. I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting that you send your children to the most expensive schools so that you can obtain the most aid. Because actually part of the aid quite often is going to be some loans. Might not all be loans. It might be some grants and various things that don't have to be paid back. But quite often it's going to be some loans that do need to be paid back. So all I really want is for parents to make that decision with their children, independently of these published tuition rates. So in my previous example that I talked about with Auburn and MIT, both very fine engineering schools, is it the right decision for the child to go to MIT? Is it the right decision to go to Auburn? I have no idea. I just don't want the MIT possibility to be eliminated because the tuition cost is twice what Auburn is. So what I was talking before the break about is just a little bit different, little bit of a difference in how we go about choosing a college. Now, most of the time what people do is most of the time the students pick the colleges that their friends are going to, or who their football, who won the Iron Bowl, who they root for, who they tailgated for, who they kind of raised, watching on TV and so forth. They might choose a certain university because of the curriculum, like veterinarian, and a lot of people went to Auburn for that, and that's fine. I just want people to go about it a little bit different. Instead of choosing a handful of colleges, going to visit those colleges, and weeding down the list, I want people to weed down the list based on the actual cost of college. And you cannot look at the tuition rates for these colleges and know actually what it's going to cost you. So what I recommend to people is that we start the process with 8 to 10 colleges. And I know that seems like a lot. Some people think, oh, how in the world are we going to start with so many? But the way that you do that is actually through the FAFSA process. I mentioned before that you go to the website, you input your income and your assets, and the outcome was this expected family contribution, this number that the government considers you able to contribute to your child's college. But in addition to your income and your assets, you also put in the colleges that your child is interested in. And this is what begins the process, because then the universities are alerted that you're interested in their school. Does this mean you're going to go there or not go there? No, it doesn't mean anything. It just means that you're interested. And that's what begins the financial aid offers from the different universities. But you have to start out with a cross-section of colleges. You need to pick multiple colleges, but they can't be the same kind of colleges. They can't just be Alabama, Auburn, and UAB. They need to be Alabama, Auburn, South Alabama, Vanderbilt, and so forth. They need to be different colleges, some in-state, out-of-state, some public, some private, some more academic than others, different cost structures, and so forth. But you need to pick a cross-section from that. And what I'm trying to lead you to is if you start out with 8 to 10 colleges, the financial offers start coming in, then you can start eliminating the colleges that don't provide you a good financial package. But what I'm wanting parents to do is to create a competitive situation for these colleges, create a competitive situation for these colleges to attract their kids. Colleges are a business, and the best analogy that I can give to you is the one that I started before about a car dealership. Do you need a new car? Do you want to pay more for that new car than you should? Well, a surefire way to do that is to walk into the dealership, express to the salesman how much you love the car and how much you're in love with the car, and giving them the idea that you're going to buy the car no matter what. So it's pretty obvious that the price that they're going to provide you is not going to be their best price. You have to create a competitive situation. If you go into a Ford dealer to buy a truck and they offer you a price for that truck, you've got to start insinuating that you're going to run down the road to the Chevrolet dealer. That's what gets you the better price. We all know that. It's a competitive situation. These guys are not going to offer you the best price for the car right away. They're going to offer you the price that they think that you'll take. But you have to create a competitive situation. The colleges are the same. The colleges are going to provide you a financial aid package equal to what they think that you're going to want to accept that college. So when you create a competitive situation by selecting all these different colleges, you're going to increase the likelihood that one college is going to be more competitive and provide more aid. Very similar to buying a car, but it has to be a cross-section of colleges. It can't be the same kind of colleges because of the things that we talked about before. Some colleges have more resources than others. Some colleges will naturally be more aggressive than others in attracting students. But in general, the first awards that you receive from these schools is not going to be their best offer. It's going to be what they think you're going to take. But if you create a competitive situation, then you increase the likelihood that they will provide you a better offer. Now, there's another issue involved with selecting a college that I also want to mention. So, going back, we start out with 8 to 10 colleges, cross-section of colleges. We go through the FAFSA process. We initiate those offers. We create a competitive situation. And we're going to talk more about next week, a little bit more about this negotiation and how you can receive these better offers. But another issue that I want to just close out with today is there's a third criteria for choosing the offer, choosing the college. If you choose 8 to 10 colleges, you're going to receive a lot of different offers. If they're different kind of colleges, the offers are going to be all over the place. And you're going to be very surprised by that. You're going to find certain colleges provide you a lot of assistance, other colleges do not. But there's also another type of aid that's out there that's called merit-based aid. Now, all the aid that we've been talking about is financial aid, financial-based aid. It's aid that's created because of financial need. It's created by the government on the premise that our society is better when everybody is educated. So they're trying to create incentives and ways that different people with different means can go to college and receive that education. So that's why it's a need-based situation, because it's based on income and assets. So obviously the less income or the less assets that you have, the more aid that you're going to have. They're trying to create an equal playing field for everybody. But merit-based aid is actually based on the merit of the child. Merit-based aid is actually administered by the admissions department. It's actually not administered by the financial aid office. And so what we generally teach people is that you need to look at colleges that your child is in the top 10%. And that's 10% in terms of the incoming freshman, by looking at all the different measurements that we have for colleges, SAT, ACT, grade point average, and so forth. And there's all that information is out there where you can get an average situation for these different universities. You can find that on the internet. It's not very hard to find. The colleges provide this information. But you want to choose universities that your child is going to be in the top 10%. And what that does is it increases the likelihood that they're going to get the merit aid. And the merit aid is actually not based on need. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not. It's actually based on the value of the student, the worthiness of the student in the eyes of the colleges. Now, let me give you a quick example of how this might work. Several years ago, I had a client that I was planning for their child to go to college. Their children were very young. And then in recent years, their daughter was in high school, and they were looking at the different colleges. They were trying to visit, trying to figure out where they want to go. And so they came into the office, and we were looking at their investments, trying to figure out what we could do and not do, and so forth. Well, the family was a big Auburn family. They've been tailgating their whole life. She really didn't want to go anywhere else but Auburn. But she was interested in nursing, so I suggested, just like what I'm suggesting to you, that we go through the FAFSA process. Now, in their situation, I was not expecting any kind of financial aid helped for them at all. It was a husband and wife physician. I expected their family contribution number to actually exceed the cost of Auburn, because based on their income and the way that they create that number, the government creates that number, I did not expect them to have any financial need. You can only have financial need when your expected family contribution is less than the cost of college. It has to be a positive number. I thought with them it would be a negative number, and it was. But that's still the starting place that everybody goes through. Now, what I also suggested to them is we pick a lot of different universities. She had no interest whatsoever in anything other than Auburn. But I convinced them, let's just choose a few other universities. Let's look for ones that she might be interested in with what she wanted to study, which was nursing. And one of those colleges that we chose was Troy. She had absolutely no interest in Troy. But when the financial aid offers came back, just like I expected, Auburn offered nothing. Total cost was going to be on the parent, 100%. No aid whatsoever. But when the offers came back from Troy, she was actually offered a full ride based on her merit. Now, she was not a Rhodes Scholar. She was not really even in the top part of her class in graduating, but she was an above-average student. But she looked very good to Troy. And Troy put the dollars forward because they wanted her. They knew it was a competitive situation. We let them know. We were looking very strongly at Auburn. And that never would have happened had we not started the process by looking at these different universities. If we had just gone into it with the idea that we just want Auburn, we're not going to find a whole lot. That's probably the best illustration I have in my career of helping parents steer their children towards certain colleges because of what the colleges provide. So in this situation, we were actually able to get a full ride. So the money that we had saved for college, we were able to use for other purposes. Again, she wasn't very thrilled about going to Troy, but she warmed up to that when we started talking about how we could buy her a car for graduation. She liked that idea. We could also buy some real estate for her to live in Troy, as opposed to living in the dorm in Auburn. And those ideas warmed her up to that. But it never would have happened unless she was not in the top 10% of the university. Now, that pretty much winds up our time today. I'll close out, and we will go into this a little bit more next week.
You've been listening to Insights with Philip Wilson, an Alabama registered investment advisor. Learn more by visiting his website at ssmistakes.com or by calling 205-868-9297.